This is episode 92 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Scott Royal Smith. Scott is the founding attorney of Royal Legal Solutions, a boutique law firm focused on protecting clients' real estate assets throughout the US and Canada. And they really only work with real estate investors. I can't wait to talk to you. He also has a long history of investing. Scott, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jonathan. Great to be here.
Yeah, I think you're only the second attorney since I'm an attorney too. So we're going to try to not bore them with our legalese, but really help investors with protection. So before I get to your full background on investing, I want to hit right off the bat, where are investors screwing up when it comes to protecting themselves from a legal point of view, whether it's entity formation or something else?
Yeah, most people ask me, when's the right time for protection, right? And they're saying, well, do I have enough to get protected? And the right time is, would you cry if you lost it? Because if you don't care about it, then why protect it, right? And then if you do have enough that you care about, then yeah, it's worth protecting. And there's an appropriate level of protection for each person, whether it might just be something as simple as like an anonymous trust to create some anonymity in the ownership of the asset. Could be like a single LLC, or if you have multiple assets, like a series LLC. That's why when people say like it depends on what assets you have, that's why it depends.
Yeah.
Right? But the right time for everybody right now is to learn. And then for a few people, it will be to take them action.
Is there like one part where you're getting, new clients who maybe a lot of times, and I know from talking to a lot of CPAs, like they come and they're like, wow, really not formed correctly. Are you seeing something across the board where there's like kind of an error zone for kind of mid-range investors who just haven't set themselves up right?
Yeah. So sometimes people will have their LLCs formed correctly, maintained correctly, had proper operating agreements to the yearly filings. Most of the time they don't. Nobody that I've run into actually has all of their LLCs or series LLCs or whatever the case may be structured appropriately with their estate plan and their living trust in part of their estate plan, and has everything up to date. Most people have formed things, and that's where their attorney stopped really talking to them. And then years have gone by. And then they're like, well, I haven't really done too much with it. Nobody was asking me too many questions about whether to make sure things were upkept. I didn't really know that I even should be even thinking about that.
Right.
Make sure all my assets are transferred inside of either my living trust or in my LLCs under my living trust or whatever the case may be. And I think that's why people are coming to us, is because we can handle everything all in one stop. And then we also meet with them twice a year at a minimum to ensure that they're doing everything correctly moving forward. Because ultimately that's how you're able to accelerate your wealth, is to be able to make sure you're not having gotchas pop up where you screwed up in the past.
Can you just explain the living will and why that's so important for a living trust, for real estate investments, and how to transfer stuff to kids maybe through that?
Yeah, for sure. So just to differentiate, so we have like anonymous trusts or land trusts. Those are just to hold assets or companies anonymously because we want some privacy. Then there's our LLCs that offer us protection if we're ever sued. And then we combine those together so we can have privacy and anonymity, and we can have protection. And there's a whole different other kind of trust called a living trust, which is for estate planning purposes. And what that does is it bypasses probate court. So probate court, if you died right now, right, what happens is all of your assets have to go through a court proceeding, which means they all become public. Who gets what becomes public. And that also can mean that a couple of bad things can happen. Besides that is, one, creditors or other people start coming out of the woodwork saying so-and-so owed me money, right? Because now it's public that there's money, right? And then the other bad thing that can happen is, well, some people will contest the probate, and what that means is all of the assets get locked up inside of a court proceeding, which means that all of the assets you thought you were going to pass to your family don't actually get to your family. So they're stuck in this really bad situation. And the way to avoid all of that is just to use something called a living trust. And then at the living trust, you completely bypass the court process. Everything stays anonymously held, and the family gets immediate control of the assets.
Yeah. And then, so you actually create the living trust, but then you have to put the assets in the name of the living trust, including bank accounts. Am I right on that?
Yeah, the better way to do it is to have the living trust formed and then have your asset holding company be owned by the living trust. And that way, all of your bank accounts, assets, et cetera, are actually all owned by the asset holding company. So that way, you have one system in process, which is all my assets are held by this asset holding company. If I get into a bad car accident and people try to sue me, they can't get to the assets because I have all my assets compartmentalized inside of a series of LLC or multiple LLCs. If something happens with one asset, they can't get to any of the other assets. You typically want to try to avoid holding any assets directly in the name of the living trust, because if I'm sued, they can try to go after what are the assets of the living trust. The living trust doesn't provide any asset protection.
Right.
That's why you
Okay.
need the LLC structure for that.
Yeah, and then I guess, like I would think like the more boring and predictable it is, the more that gives you the option to take small educated risks on things that maybe you wouldn't if you thought you didn't have any backing. But to have a whole subset of assets that's like really performing well and boring, that is a good thing.
Yeah, that's what you want, And then if you want to take a percentage of your portfolio and gamble, because you like doing some Vegas,
Right.
what am I going to say? I'm going to say like life isn't supposed to be a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
But the if you read any books on like what it is about, like at least all the books I've read, maybe if you read different books that tell you differently, please tell me. But like when it talks about like scaling, right? And what does it take to like scale a company or scale a business? What they continually talk about is that it's systematic. Like there's a system and a process, which means it's predictable and it's the same. But the same to us as human beings means boring.
Yeah.
Right? We don't really like same over and over and over again, but that's actually what it takes to get to scale, right? So the trick I found is that you try to leverage as much through existing systems and processes as you can to make those part of your life really boring. And then the part of your life that becomes like exciting is like your deal finding, are the ways that you're generating like top line revenue, right? It's like your networking, what deals are you looking at? What things are you excited about there? But the more time you're spending time trying to think through like all the different types of tax shelters I could be using or deduction strategies or whatever, you're not spending that time doing the thing that's actually going to make you the most money, which is actually the most fun, which is the deal finding and the top line revenue production. So just stay with what's fun and stay with what's interesting, and then my advice is everything else in life, kick off to somebody else if you possibly can.